So this garden bed is full of perennials, annuals, tropicals, and the information that I'm seeing put out online about leaving the foliage in place over the winter so the plant can have it as insulation. I don't feel like they cover enough of that topic for people to make the best decision that's right for them. So I'm just going to take this opportunity to share the things you need to consider about making that decision. So as we approach the middle of December, it's a good time to clean up some of the perennials and fading annuals in the bed. And, you know, here in zone 9, everything is still, you know, pretty much chugging along. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start cutting out the most vulnerable tropicals. We have dipped into the 30s a couple times, and tonight we're dipping into the 30s again. And there's a lot of tropicals that start looking pretty sad around this time. They don't die necessarily until we have a freeze, but it's just a good idea to go ahead and scale them back as long as you have mulch. Now, there's a lot of information out there that says you should leave the tops of plants in place so it can act as insulation, and that is true for a lot of plants. However, and the ones that just have really sparse stems that aren't going to act as any insulation is one time. And then the other time is when the leaves of the plants are so big that it can cause problems for other plants that are in the area, which that's what I'm going to tackle today. So those in this garden, that would be the Crotons, the Caladiums, and the Hidden Gingers. Leaving the foliage on those plants in place is not going to benefit these plants or the plants around it as any type of insulation. Mulch is going to do a much better job. And the bacteria that these big leaves can harbor if they happen to lay down on nearby plants is much worse and harmful to the surrounding plants than just putting some mulch. The mulch is definitely the win here. So this bed already has a decent layer of mulch, and they've already put their Christmas lights here, so I'm not going to be able to add additional mulch, but I am trimming back these big leaf tropicals that have desirable plants nearby. One, you know, it just looks better, but also to prevent any potential negative impacts of when they do die back. We don't want to really be in that position. So since they've already put their Christmas lights out, I need to be a little more careful. But since the Crotons just have really one main stem, I'm just taking them back all the way to the ground, because these are the size leaves, you know, if they come down on these kale, the kale's going to suffer. Kale should be able to shine all winter, so there's no reason to put the kale at risk just to leave the foliage on the Croton. So those are the variables that you have to consider in your garden when you are, you know, listening to a lot of information that's out there. It doesn't apply to every situation. You have to look at your specific conditions and then weigh the benefits versus the risks, because there will always be a few different variables that apply to every situation. And even from garden to garden, not just from state to state or house to house, you know, within 15 feet, there can be different variables where different exceptions can apply. There's not a one hard set of rules that can apply to every single garden and every single situation for this type of practice. Here's a perfect example. I've got some small kales and pansies planted in it right here. You have to excuse the Christmas lights. I'm going to get these out. Okay, so I am a full-on believer in doing as least work and keeping things as natural as possible. And I'm also believe in leaving the leaves, keeping the leaves in your garden so the beneficial insects have a place to overwinter. So even though you may be collecting them in a bag, if you have a corner of the yard that you can dump these in when you're done cutting them, that's always going to be the best thing you can do, is putting it back somewhere. Usually I go find like somewhere in one of the back beds behind some shrubs sometimes and dump it. But we're still going to use these. We're not going to put them in the trash. That's definitely not a good practice, but that's for another video. Anyway, back to the topic. If I left these hidden gingers in place right here and just let them die naturally and stay there all winter, what would happen is potentially they're going to fall on this kale that I want to thrive all winter. This is going to go through late spring. So I don't want to expose this kale to the risk of these rotting leaves laying on it, because that would just really defeat the purpose of putting the kale there. So I need to give the kale an advantage and protect it from any type of negative drama like that. So that is the perfect time that I would remove the leaves. Now, like I said, I know this has plenty of mulch. And the other thing is the kale will also act as an insulator. So I'm not removing the insulation. By doing this, I'm giving the kale more room, more airflow, and more sunlight to get bigger and help keep this ground warm for this hidden ginger. And probably by the time this hidden ginger starts to come back, will be about the time that I'm cutting that kale out anyway. So it's about a balance. Now, if I were not planting any winter annuals in this bed, I wouldn't have as much to worry about when it comes to this. You know, my job with the clients that hire me, my job is to keep their garden just looking the most beautiful that it can the entire year. That is my job. I have 14 different garden beds that I take care of, and it's pretty much the same practice. That's what I'm hired to do. And so when I'm taking steps to, maintain yards, I am always thinking of preserving that beauty. And then I'm also aligning my practices with what's best for Mother Nature as much as possible. I'm always leaning towards that. Back to the subject of removing the leaves before they become a problem. And just understanding that every garden will have variables where you cannot apply the exact same rule throughout. So I wish that the people who would preach these practices about leaving leaving your leaves completely where they are to insulate your plant would really understand that that cannot apply in a very tight landscaped area setting. But it does apply in certain areas for certain plants no matter what, such as my lemongrass. And if I cut that back, it will die because it's really sensitive to frosts. So of course I leave that. However, in that 5 to 6 foot area of where that grass is, there's nothing it's gonna hurt. And all those leaves together basically will create straw, which is an insulator. So that is a definite strategy that I apply for that situation. And a lot of ornamental grasses, this works. Some of them I have to cut halfway, but I will not remove, cut them all the way to the ground like I'm doing here. So grasses are one of the exceptions, as long as there's space around them, but their leaves technically turn into a straw and they don't create a risk for nearby plants, even if they do lay on them. Not as big a risk as a leaf like this. So there's another little practice that can be done that helps keep the ground insulated. If you're interested in ways that you can contribute to some insulation on the ground with the plant matter you have, when you're trimming back some of these bigger leaves, if you have smaller plants, like this begonia has some empty stems on it, when I trim those, I'm just gonna let them stay in place where they are around the base of the plant. And that is actually contributing to it's the same principle as leaving them on there, but I'm just removing them myself instead of waiting for them to die, so that way they don't kind of fall on itself and die, because usually the outer ones that are the weakest, those are the ones that are gonna die off first. And in our region, it's just so touch and go. I could have one corner of the bed get completely frostbit, and then 20 feet away, everything's fine because, there was a canopy of a tree, and the way the house is situated and the way the sun hits the house, it just created this radiating heat that kept everything warm enough for that night. So, I'm always considering the possibility of everything living and everything dying, and then making sure the conditions that surround those individual plants are not going to create an unfavorable situation that's going to cause it to decline any quicker than it should. The perennials, we definitely want them to come back. But like I said, with the 3 kales that I have planted here, they're going to do a better job of keeping the ground warm than these, the dead foliage from this ginger plant. So, that's what I'm doing. And then the other little small foliage, I'm just letting it kind of fall in place and stay there and feed the soil. These are the principles that I'm applying throughout the entire garden as I work. I'm removing leaves that could create a risk, and then I'm making sure the kale has optimum space, and then any of the smaller plants that I trim back, like these begonias, I'm just letting those stems fall at the base of the plant. Anything that would be big enough to fall over and touch another plant is what I'm trimming off. And then if the stems are small enough, I'm letting them lay in place. I'm not taking them out of the bed. I'm just gonna let them stay there. These kale will now have a much better chance of reaching their full potential by me removing all these risky leaves of debris. I mean, and plus it really does look a lot nicer and cleaner, just keeping your beds clean. Okay, so here's another example. I'm moving this croton. You know, and these crotons were really only put here as just to tuck in some fall color. They're not a staple landscape plant. I'm not gonna expect them to come back next year. It's not really a concern if they're gonna come back or not. I'm not worried about them. If they do, great, but I'm not concerning myself with that particular aspect of things. I'm more concerned about what I want to last from now to spring, and then creating favorable conditions for those plants. And that, of course, is gonna be the kale. The verbena is another one that can be really showy. The begonias have a big enough leaf that I don't want them around the kale when it freezes. So I'm removing the leaves, but I'm keeping those in the bed. And I'm just lightly trimming the verbena here. These pentas, I'm just taking back a little bit, just enough to where I know they can't plop over on the kale when we get some cool weather. Okay, so here's some more gingers. So here's an example where I've got the crotons, the ginger, and then I have these angelonias. These angelonias, you know, they're tougher than they look. Since their leaves are small enough that they're not directly near anything that can cause damage, I'm still just gonna focus on removing the croton and these hidden ginger leaves, and I'm gonna let the angelonia stay there as long as, you know, it can, so that way it's offering a little bit of color. There are some hidden gingers down here, so I'm gonna move all these lights. You can see these pentas already have a little touch of the frost image. It's getting back. So as soon as these lights come down, I'll be cutting back most of that, the variegated ginger back there. When you're gonna apply a practice, you can't just think that because you heard you should keep everything in place over winter and don't cut anything back. That is not gonna apply in every situation as a benefit. So that's just the takeaway from this video, and I hope that this is a practice that you can learn to apply in the way that it'll benefit you most.